Listen up!
Now listen, we gotta talk.
It's what we do best.
This is today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're still in hour number one, this live broadcast. Appreciate you guys coming along for the ride here on Friday. I want to welcome onto the stage a former British MP with the Labour Party, former Labour MP, and now is a host of a fantastic show, Palestine Declassified, airs on Press TV, but you can watch it on Rumble. We'll talk about that at the end of the program with Chris Williamson on the line right now. Chris, thank you for joining us this week.
Good to be with you, Patrick. Nice to see you.
It's great to see you too. Chris, first off, I want to get your comments because we haven't spoke about the Hague. And I want to get your comments on what happened last week, the historic significance of it, and also the political significance of it, because I think it's very significant, even though, as many critics will say, Chris, the international courts of justice, whatever decision they render in the interim or down the line long term, it's not binding as such or not enforceable, but actually it has massive political implications more broadly internationally as well. But your reactions, your thoughts on the developments last week with South Africa?
Well, it was a groundbreaking moment, Patrick, in my opinion. There's no doubt about that. And I think it's significant that it was South Africa, a country that was plagued by the apartheid regime for many years. And it was, South Africa that took the lead in actually taking this really important step. And it's also significant that not a single Western country, as far as I'm aware, has actually supported South Africa's bid to hold Israel to account for its genocide that it's perpetrating in Gaza right now. And I think we are seeing perhaps the biggest disconnect between the wider general public in the Western world and the political class. And, this year there are unprecedented numbers of elections. And I firmly predict that a number of those politicians, I'd like to see all of them, but it probably won't be, but a lot of them will actually twice electorally at those elections. Certainly in Britain, I think the Labour Party in particular is losing ground in a lot of constituencies with a significant Muslim population. So I think they could, even though they're riding high in the opinion polls, could end up losing ground. But what was also, I think, very telling was the Israeli sort of disconnect with reality. I mean, it was quite astonishing, the presentation from the Israeli side at the court, and the way in which the South African team actually put their case. It was incredibly well presented, measured, open and shut case. It seems to me, really, in terms of the way they put it. And so not only, in my opinion, is this a situation where, Israel is on trial for its crimes against humanity, but I think the International Court of Justice is also on trial because, clearly the Israeli regime is committing a genocide as defined. And there will be a lot of pressure applied to those judges not to find against Israel. And so I think in that sense, the whole kind of rules-based order is on trial here. And, those judges themselves are as much on trial in a sense, in are they prepared to uphold, international law, or are they going to, kowtow to the US empire?
Yes, and you mentioned Labour Party. Let's actually go straight into that. A lot of politicians, there seems to be lockstep, Chris, if I'm not mistaken. Tories, Labour, Lib Dems. I didn't see anybody really pushing back against Israel when this really sort of kicked off, when they began their operations, their serious military operations incurring on Gaza, October 13th. Everybody was waiting for some dissent. There didn't seem to be very much. And I think there was a feeling amongst the British political elites that they could weather the storm on this, that they had Israel on their side. It was against the terrorists, Hamas, so to speak, and that they could ride that narrative really to victory. They really believed the IDF was going to just crush the will of the Palestinian people and crush any opposition to what now is being widely regarded globally as a genocide. How's that global pressure, Chris, coming to bear on politicians in Britain who might be looking at this now, Chris, and saying, did we make a huge catastrophic miscalculation politically here by backing Israel without any, just categorically backing Israel? What do you think, Chris?
I think they have made a strategic error, but they are doubling down, and they're still not prepared to call out the Israeli regime in the way in which they should. And the Labour Party, I mean, it's always been referred to as a broad church, so it's had both spectrums of opinion, really, from the kind of centre right to the centre left and further left. And it's always been a vehicle for the peace movement. There was a very strong peace contingent, if you like, within the Labour Party. I was a member of the Labour Party for 44 years, and many Labour Party activists, many Labour MPs for that matter, were the backbone of the campaign for nuclear disarmament, for example, when there was a big campaign to stop the United States from sighting cruise missiles, nuclear-tipped cruise missiles in the UK. But that has gone, and we had the high watermark, really, in my view, for the Labour Party was when Jeremy Corbyn became the leader. This was a man who was a peace activist, an anti-imperialist, a pro-Palestinian campaigner, a very strident critic of the Zionist entity, somebody who's spoken out against imperialism, and as well as on the domestic front, economically, talking about a socialist economic agenda. And this was anathema to the establishment in Britain, but it also turned out to be anathema to a large section of the Labour Party as well. And as a result of that, he was pushed out. Now the Labour Party's completely lost the plot. Any dissent, anybody who dares to speak out against Israel or in support of Palestine are suspended from the party or indeed expelled from the party. But, this isn't playing well for the Labour Party electorally. They are riding high in the opinion polls, that's true. But there are a lot of constituencies where they are in danger, actually, of losing parliamentary representation. And indeed, there was a council, a local authority by-election recently in a largely Jewish community, actually. I think there's about 40% Jewish community, and Labour got absolutely trounced in that constituency. And it wasn't one of the new left-wing groupings which are propping up all over the country. And I mean, I've joined the Workers' Party led by George Galloway, a long-standing anti-imperialist and pro-Palestine campaigner. But it was the Conservatives that benefited in this by-election. So a lot of people, a lot of the commentators are writing off the chances of the Conservative Party at the next election. But they could indeed rally and may do better than what many people think. But I mean, one of the points I've been making, Patrick, that both in terms of domestic policy and certainly international policy, there is no choice in Britain anymore. There is no choice for the electorate between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party anymore, or indeed or any of the other parties really that are represented in the Houses of Parliament. The SNP, to be fair, the Scottish Nationalist Party, have been slightly more supportive of the Palestinian cause, but on many other issues, there is no real. You couldn't get a cigarette paper between them. So our democracy has been stolen from us, and what that is resulting in is a desire to create an alternative vehicle. As I mentioned, I've joined the Workers' Party, but there are other groups as well, the Trade Union and the Socialist Coalition. There is a grouping in London, the Newham Independents, they call themselves, an area of London. We saw indeed in another part of London, in the Tower Hamlets, a couple of years ago now, Look for Raymond stormed the mayoral election, won it by a landslide, and they also won a majority of the seats on the local authority as well, with a new party in Tower Hamlets called Aspire. So these groupings are emerging, Patrick, all over the country, and the anger which is being expressed towards the political class in the UK is really palpable, actually, as a result of the stance that they're taking on the Palestinian question. We're seeing rallies, all over the country, in small towns, not just big cities, not just London, obviously London, we're seeing massive, hundreds of thousands of people, biggest ever rallies in support of Palestine that in the country's history. Some of the biggest rallies we've ever seen. I mean, rallies on a scale not quite as big as the anti-Iraq rally that we saw 20 odd years ago, but not far short of that. These are unprecedented times, but right across the country, though, Patrick, we're seeing as I say, in small towns and cities, people turning out to express their solidarity. And what is really also very troubling is not only this disconnect between the political class that we've mentioned, but also the disconnect between the mainstream media, who are parroting, the Zionist lines and are, taking action against pro-Palestinian activists in terms of, writing, sort of hit pieces against them. And then we have the police, being mobilized really in the interests of Tel Aviv. It's quite astonishing. We're seeing people being arrested, manhandled, beaten by the police for expressing their support for Palestine. It's quite astonishing. Just for displaying a Palestinian flag, for example, people have been arrested. And indeed, there was a piece in one of the alternative independent media outlets called Dorset Eye just yesterday, I think it was, that had an exclusive about a police raid on a pensioner in Cornwall by the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary. And 4 police turned up, arrested her, searched the house on the premise that she'd attached a pro-Palestinian poster calling out the local MP who's actually supported the genocide in Gaza. And they said, you've committed criminal damage because she pinned a poster to a door. It's unbelievable, Patrick. We've never seen anything like this. It really is quite astonishing, the way in which, the state in Britain is mobilizing against the people on behalf of Israel. I mean, our politicians are elected to represent the British people. Our police are there to serve the interests of and keep the interests of the British people and keep them safe. The media is supposed to be, as it were, a conduit, if you like, to represent, although it's never really been that, but to, as it were, be a conduit for, mainstream British opinion on matters. But they're just all being run, it seems to me, by the Zionist lobby, by the Israeli lobby, honestly, I mean, it's quite it's quite astonishing to behold what is being happening. But people are not having it, in spite of the attempts of the police and the media and their politicians. People are still turning out in ever bigger numbers every single week, and we're seeing that across the world, aren't we, Patrick? Not just in the global south, but right across the west, in the United States of America and Europe. And in Europe, as you know, Patrick, some countries have banned demonstrations in support of Palestine. Banned demonstrations. And yet people are still turning out in their tens of thousands, their hundreds of thousands. So, I think this year, they say this unprecedented number of elections taking place across the world. These politicians who were so out of touch, I think they really will pay a price. And certainly as far as the Labour Party is concerned, I mean, I think... It is as I say, it's riding high in the opinion polls, but it's only because the Conservative Party is so despised. It's not because people, if you like, have been convinced by the Labour Party. It's just they see it, I think, as the lesser of two evils. Although I'm not even sure that it is that. But we'll see. Anyways, these are interesting times in which we are living with the International Court of Justice. The South African action which is being taken, which has inspired people around the world. The actions as well, Patrick, let's not forget, excellent what South Africa has done, but let's also remember and acknowledge the efforts of Yemen in actually trying to provide some support to Palestine, to Gaza. And, we've seen these airstrikes being launched by the US and the poodle, the United Kingdom, the United States poodle, as it were, killing people in Yemen. But look, there is no provision in international law for those airstrikes, Patrick. But I think Yemen have absolutely a case in international law to take the action that they are doing to blockade their waters, to stop Israeli ships and to stop ships going to and from Israeli ports until such time as they bring this carnage that they are inflicting on the Palestinian people in Gaza, until they bring that to an end. And there is provision, isn't there, Patrick, under the responsibility to protect doctrine, that Yemen are applying here. And again, the action that Yemen has taken, as far as I'm aware, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, I don't think they've killed anybody, unlike the United States and the UK when they struck Yemen with their, in my opinion, illegal airstrikes. A number of people were killed, but it's just, it goes back to the old colonial mentality, the gunboat diplomacy that we've seen, over the years, that was, deployed by, Britain and the Western countries, and certainly the United States more recently. And people are, seeing through this in increasing numbers. And, platforms like yours, Patrick, are so important, I think, to provide this alternative narrative to people. People are sick to death of our politicians. They're sick to death of the propaganda that they are seeing on their corporate media television screens. That's not to minimize that. Obviously, it does still have an impact. But people are getting their information from alternative sources, and they're increasingly seeing that what they're seeing on their television screens is totally out of step with what they're seeing on their smartphones and on their laptops from reports from actually on the ground. And just to finally, Patrick, in this part, anyway, for me, I know I've gone on for a bit too long there, perhaps, but just in terms of Al Jazeera, as one of the mainstream channels, has done an outstanding job, I think, of bringing the reality, bringing the truth to people of what life is like for the Palestinian people in Gaza under this appalling onslaught from the Israeli regime. And, look, the Palestinians, have suffered 75 years of apartheid. We've seen 58 years of an illegal occupation following the 1967 war, and and Gaza itself has been subjected to a blockade now since 2007. These things cannot be allowed to stand for a moment longer, in my opinion. And people are increasingly demanding that policymakers, their politicians, actually do step up and actually start speaking out and taking action, in defense of human rights, and taking action actually in the interest of the people that they're supposed to represent, and what the people actually want to see happening, because people's sympathy is increasing with the Palestinian people, not with the Zionist entity.
It is an extraordinary time in history, Chris, because all these things you mentioned, whether it's the protesters in the UK, across Europe, across the world, who are clearly coming out in record numbers. I've never seen a sustained anti-war protest like this in my life. It's absolutely incredible for this issue. It's surprised a lot of people, Chris, but they're coming out really also in opposition of genocide, which is regarded as one of the sort of highest crimes against humanity imaginable, so much so that there was an international convention put into place after the Second World War for the express purpose of preventing genocide from happening. And it's always been a catch-up game with people trying to make cases, prove cases. It can be highly politicized as well, as we've seen in the past with the West's kind of characterization of the Uyghur issue in Western China. And also there are some questions around the Bosnian genocide investigation as well, heavily politicized on the NATO side. That said, here we have a textbook example, according to the outgoing head of the UN Human Rights Commission, and a textbook example of genocide that's happening in real time, that there is no debate as to what people have seen. And you have governments and state agencies and police forces defending the genocide and going against people protesting against genocide. So this has really warped our Western values, you could say, Chris, to a degree that is just, to me, astonishing. To me, it's astonishing that anybody can defend Israel at this point. And Yemen is basically defending UN resolutions. They're defending the Geneva Convention, and Yemen's defending the Genocide Convention. And they're enforcing it. They're sanctioning Israel. So, and their payment for that from the West is for the West to wage war against them. I mean, so it's an extraordinary time in history, Chris. And I'm just saying, when is the penny going to drop? Will the penny drop? Because you've probably seen similar U-turns in history, Chris. Are we going to get a big U-turn coming up where it just becomes just unbearable for these people to hold this position? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think potentially, look, at the end of the day, I mean, my experience of being a parliamentarian for 7.5 years is that all of them, almost with no exception, are careerists. And I think when they feel that this is going to have an impact on what they perceive as a career, and I never ever felt that being a member of parliament was a career. It shouldn't be. When you start treating your role as a parliamentarian as a career, then you start to make decisions based on what's good for your career. And, consequently, you make bad decisions in those circumstances. You're there to represent the people and just, to stand up for a, particular political ideology that, you've been elected to implement, as it were. So I think that will potentially concentrate in the minds of some of those careerists. But I'd say a number of people are going to start losing their seats anyway. So, I think we could see a new cohort of people potentially coming into positions of power to becoming policy makers. That will, I think, help to turn things around. I mean, for example, the leader of my party, Workers' Party, George Galloway, well known on the international stage, is standing for the London Mayor, which is the most, significant, important, directly elected role in the country, really. I mean, probably the most influential role, below the Prime Minister, actually. And I think he's in with a reasonable chance of winning that. It's an international, position, and he will use that to great effect. It seems to me, not just for the people of London and in terms of those domestic policies, but also, on that international stage as well, on foreign policy too. But just going back, to Yemen, and you mentioned, the Geneva Convention and the Genocide Convention that was put in place after the war. I mean, Article 8 of that convention, as I'm sure you know, Patrick, says that countries are supposed to take action, to prevent or suppress acts of genocide. This is what Yemen is doing. Other countries should be joining Yemen, not bombing them, for God's sake. It's absolutely outrageous that, a country that is trying to stop a genocide, which is acting within international law, acting within Article 8 of that Genocide Convention that was put in place, let's remember, in the aftermath of the genocide against the Jewish people. And then, ironies of ironies, the nation, the country that claims to be the nation of the Jews, although many Jews actually obviously argue against that, as you know, is the country that is engaged in a genocide. I mean, my God, what has happened, to the world? Talk about a topsy-turvy world. So, yeah, I think there is a reckoning not that far around the corner. I mean, I'm perhaps the eternal optimist, Patrick, but I do genuinely feel that certainly what I'm seeing on my television screen in terms of those protests I'm talking about now, and the strength of feeling, as I've said, not just in this country, but all over the world, and not just in the global south, in the Western world, the so-called advanced Western world as well. People are really sickened by what they've seen, and the scales, I think, have fallen from many people's eyes. And I just think that think and hope and believe that people will not tolerate and tolerate this much longer. And will actually, when they get the opportunity and and the elections come around, to actually make some of these characters actually pay a price, pay an electoral price. So I think we have to be optimistic. We have to work to try and ensure that we use these elections to, to make these recalcitrant politicians pay a price. Hopefully, the ICJ will find the nerve, if you like, to do the right thing, based on the evidence, which is unanswerable, and find against Israel and find in favour, obviously, of South Africa's indictment that they brought against Israel. And, that will have significant consequences because, obviously, as you know from that, I think it goes to the UN Security Council to have that finding, that ruling, that judgment to be implemented, as it were. That might get vetoed by the United States of America, judging by what we've seen when there's been attempts at the UN Security Council to get a ceasefire. We've seen how they've They've used their veto powers. Indeed, so has the United Kingdom have used their veto or abstain. Latterly, I think there's an attempt to get a ceasefire resolution through there. But if that happens, then it will go to the UN General Assembly, and I think the votes are there for that. And Israel could be suspended from the United Nations, and Palestine could be brought in as a full member of the UN, and wouldn't that be a great thing? There could be an international criminal tribunal established to look at what the crimes against humanity that Israel has committed. Could be agreement on sanctions. All these things, of course, should have happened years ago, but we have a chance now, Patrick, for these things to actually, come into fruition. And then, of course, there is also the potentiality of further legal action being taken for the way in which the United States, the United Kingdom, other Western European countries have been complicit in genocide. And there is provision in international law for action to be taken against those countries as well. And I think South Africa, again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I seem to recall last week or the week before, South Africa was talking about taking action, actually, follow-up action against the US and possibly other countries as well. So that's something I think that we should be definitely encouraging. But one other thing I would say about international law is, where is the International Criminal Court, Patrick? The International Criminal Court is a joke, actually. They issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin for moving children out of a war zone to a place of safety.
I know.
But there's no kind of equivalent arrest warrant being served for these war criminals who are murdering tens of thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of children. What is it now? 8 or 9, 10,000 children have been killed.
Yeah. So around 10,000.
The ICC have completely, been asleep at the wheel, it seems to me.
It's unbelievable. Listen, I want to talk about the ICC, and I also want to talk about the public relations blow that has been dealt the Israeli propaganda machine, which I know you've been covering very closely on your program with David Miller. After the break, I'm with Chris Williamson, former British MP. We are talking about the issues surrounding Gaza, the genocide, Palestine and Israel, how this is going to reverberate through Western politics and indeed global geopolitics. All this and more on the other side. Stay with us.
When a crisis hits close to home and across the globe, nonprofits are on the front lines, ready to serve.
Keep coming.
The demand for charitable services has skyrocketed, and nonprofits are rising to meet the needs. Healing, nurturing, rescuing, honoring, protecting, caring, inspiring. The work of philanthropic organizations of all sizes, across all missions, has never been more important. And it's donors and volunteers like you who make all this possible. Thank you. Together, we change the world. The Nonprofit Alliance.
Our beautiful world is changing, withering, dying, by the hands of those who don't value nature, even though we all depend on it for life itself. But there is hope. Together with caring friends, the Nature Conservancy can restore our lands and save our wildlife with big solutions only nature can provide. To learn more, visit nature.org today.
Patrick Henningsen talks on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome, folks. Welcome back. We're in the final segment of the first hour here on this live broadcast on TNT, today's News Talk. Thank you guys for joining us. I'm with Chris Williamson, former British MP. He's also the host of a fantastic program which airs on Press TV, plus it airs globally. It's available on Rumble. It's called Palestine Declassified with David Miller as co-host. This is a go-to program. We'll have a chance to talk to Chris about that before we break at the end of the segment. But Chris, you mentioned the ICC before the break, the International Criminal Court. Now, that's different from the International Courts of Justice, which is a world court which is set up for countries to the actions of countries to be on trial, or country versus country. The ICC can indict individuals. And the British barrister who's kind of in charge of the criminal proceedings there, Karim Khan, as you said, very dodgy indictment of Vladimir Putin and another Russian official over taking children out of the war zone. I mean, unbelievable. People have looked into that. The Gray Zone as well has done a great expose debunking that entire charge by the ICC. But they will likely, Chris, get a referral from the ICJ. I think just the political force behind that's going to be unstoppable. It might be delayed. I'm sure the U.S. and Israel and Britain will do everything they can to delay any action on that referral, but it's coming. There's no way that it's not coming. There's a number of countries that are now building up that have just, shown their horror, their abject horror to what has happened. So that's coming, Chris. It's just that the wheels are going to be a little bit slow. But once that emergency provisional judgment is made in the next days or weeks, then the complicity, aiding, abetting Israel, those charges can then be filed by different countries. So that then opens the door for what you're talking about, Chris, the complicity side. And who's going to be at the front of the queue for that? The United States and anyone else providing material support. Let's talk about that for a minute, and then I want to talk about the propaganda issue. Go ahead, Chris.
No, indeed. I mean, I think that's a very, very important point. The ICJ, could issue this kind of interim kind of cease and desist order, which could lead to the kind of implications which I, referred to earlier on, and then all the consequential issues in relation to complicity and so on. So that is very, very significant. Excuse me. It's a very significant moment in history, and we shouldn't, as it were, underestimate. Indeed, I think historians, when they look back, will see this year as as a potentially really pivotal year in the history of the world, and particularly in relation to the Middle East. But no, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, unlike the ICJ, that goes after ICC. This is individuals, as it were, and this is why the arrest warrant was issued for Vladimir Putin, and they've been very poor, really, I think, and they've shown themselves up, frankly, to just simply be a tool of Western imperialism. The International Criminal Court, and this is where the ICJ, need to, given such a powerful case that the entire world, has seen this. I mean, it's the first time. It's kind of unprecedented. We're seeing a genocide unfold before our very eyes. There's only one decision that they can make. They will lose any credibility whatsoever, I think, if they do not find against Israel. So we're living in very interesting times, and that interim decision, is fairly imminent, I think. I mean, it's not. We're not going to have to wait years for that. I mean, it is. It will certainly. We're talking. Weeks or months, certainly, no more. It should be sooner rather than later, given what's been happening in Gaza and continuing to happen in Gaza. And indeed, while the hearing was taking place at the ICJ, Israel was doubling down with a massacre in Khan Yunis and stepping up its military offensive. I mean, they're absolutely shameless. And I think the whole notion of a two-state option has been a dead duck for many years, but it's been dusted down by the United States and Britain and Europe, etc. But Benjamin Netanyahu just showed his utter contempt for the United States. Their biggest benefactor just gave them two fingers and said, "We're not going to have a two-state solution." So he said yesterday, Chris. He said, "From the river to the sea." To the sea, exactly. The phrase, Patrick. He said, the phrase, Patrick, in Britain. Yeah, I'm going to say the phrase in Britain, where if you actually chant that phrase, you're in danger of being arrested when it's referring to Palestine. But this is, it's 5K for Benjamin Netanyahu to and when he's talking about it, what he's talking about is ethnic cleansing, genociding the Palestinian people. I mean, I think, the Palestinians, when they talk about from the river to the sea, they're talking about, a sort of unitary state, where everybody has equal rights, as it were. Although how it will be, our people who've been inflicting, this genocide. I mean, and it's not just the Israeli occupation forces that are guilty here. I mean, there's overwhelming support for what they're doing from the Israeli general public, and those views have hardened actually over this last sort of few months, rather than going in the opposite direction. So it will be a challenge, I think. But yeah, incredible times, and so yes, we'll I mean, obviously we've got the presidential election coming up in the United States, and yes, I mean, things could change radically.
The other thing that's key, Chris, is South Africa didn't address this specifically in their presentation last Thursday, but October 7th, what actually happened on October 7th? I know you guys have covered this at Palestine Declassified, the Gray Zone as well. Max Blumenthal, others have done a great job. Propaganda & Co., which is a great account on X Twitter. They've exposed this. And the Israeli press are the ones that have reported all of this, basically, that there was, quote, friendly fire, and it took the lives of potentially many hundreds of Israelis on October 7th. And then they lowered the numbers from 1,400 down to below 1,000. And then there's questions over combatant numbers and so forth. That all paints a very different picture. So I think the impregnable propaganda machine, Chris, the Hasbara machine, as it's known, has been dealt a severe blow, because how important is that October 7th narrative? Because everything seems to be built around that. Go ahead.
It does, thoughts. And the corporate media constantly trot this out. Even now, even with these horrific statistics from what we're seeing in Gaza, still they trot out what happened on October the 7th. But they don't tell the full story that you've just alluded to there, Patrick. The overwhelming majority of people that were killed on October the 7th were combatants and were killed by the Israelis. They invoked the Hannibal Directive. More information is coming out about this now. The Hannibal Directive is essentially a directive which there's been in place now for 10, 15 years, I think it is, to essentially prevent any Israelis being taken hostage, and to use maximum force, even if that means killing the potential hostages, because they don't want to get into a hostage exchange scenario. Bearing in mind that Israel has got thousands of Palestinian hostages on administrative detention, etc., in Israeli dungeons. And the idea of the October the 7th prison breakout, as it's been characterized, was to take captives as a bargaining chip to get the thousands of Palestinians who've been unfairly, unlawfully, you could argue, incarcerated, many of them for many, many years, with no charge, no due process or anything. But on that day, and indeed, some of the people that were there, the eyewitness accounts have said that there was Israeli tanks that were fired. They mobilized helicopters, and there was airstrikes from the air, and many of the cars that were taken out. All of the cars indeed that were taken out by Israeli airstrikes on the basis of preventing Israeli hostages being taken. And many of the other people that died got killed in the crossfire because there's many Israeli military officials who were there. I mean, some of them were off-duty soldiers, but had access to guns, and there was a firefight. Excuse me, and so the Israelis killed most of those people on that day. But look, why did October the 7th happen? As I've already pointed out earlier in our conversation, Patrick, Israel has been subjecting the Palestinian people to a brutal apartheid system since it was established in 1948. Brutal terrorism against the Palestinian. That's the key
point. Yeah, you made the key point right there. We're going to have to
liberation struggle. Anytime any liberation struggle, but regrettably, there's going to be violence. Look, I'm a pacifist. Actually, my instincts are pacifistic, but I understand why the October the 7th happened. What do you expect when you cage people in a concentration camp in that way? since 2007, and longer than that in terms of the oppression that the Palestinian people have been subjected to.
We're going to have to wrap it up. We're going to have to wrap it up, Chris. We're running out of time. But you made the big point at the end, which everybody needs to focus on. This didn't happen in a vacuum, not by any stretch of the imagination. Chris Williamson, thank you very much. Palestine Declassified. Tune into Rumble. Watch Chris and David Miller. Fantastic program. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Patrick.